The auction yard smelled of blood, sweat, and broken things. It was high noon, and the sun hung like a merciless judge above the wooden platform where men shouted over horses, cattle, and rusted tools. Cracked leather creaked, dust rose with every stomp, and the heat made the whiskey on tongues burn sharper. The townsfolk of Esperanza gathered like vultures, laughing, bargaining, throwing glances that judged, priced, discarded. There was no room here for dignity-only deals. Levi Rollins stood at the edge of the yard, hat low over weather-worn eyes, boots planted like stones in dry earth. He'd come for a mule something strong to replace the one that died hauling logs last week. That was it. No trouble, no talk. Just the animal and gone. But then they brought her out. She was barefoot, shackled at the wrists, filthy but still unbroken. A young Apache girl, couldn't have been more than 17, led onto the platform like some animal not worth naming. Her long black hair hung in mats. Her chin was raised, but her face was unreadable. Not angry, not afraid, just ... quiet. The auctioneer barked out numbers, jabbing a hand toward her as if she were a busted fence post. $10. Who'll take the savage? Quiet as death, works like a donkey. Hell, might even warm a bed if you train her. Right, men laughed. One whistled. Another spat. Levi's jaw twitched. He wasn't a man easily stirred, but something shoved cold fingers through his ribs. She didn't flinch, didn't blink, just stared into nothing. $10. The auctioneer barked again. Come on, boys, you paid more for boots. A beat of silence. Then Levi spoke. 10. The word came out dry, flat, almost accidental. Heads turned. Someone laughed. All hell, Rollins, someone jeered. Didn't know you was talking in pets now. The auctioneer slammed his gavel. Sold. To the silent rancher in the back. Ain't that just sweet irony? He didn't remember stepping forward, didn't feel the coin pass from his hand, didn't hear the jokes. All he saw was the girl still silent, still unreadable, as the chains were dropped into his palm. The metal was hot. They walked out together, not speaking. Her steps were light, barefoot soles leaving barely a mark in the dust. She didn't look at him. She didn't look at anything. She just walked at the edge of town, where the ground sloped and the wind stopped carrying voices. He stopped. Loosen the chain. You're not my prisoner, he said. Ain't got it in me to keep one. She didn't run. She didn't speak. Just stood there, staring at the horizon like it owed her something. He sighed. You want to go? Go. Still, she stayed. Ride back to his ranch was long and wordless. She rode behind him, arms wrapped loosely around his waist, her grip feather-light, as if afraid even contact might steal something from her. When they reached the house-weathered boards, a porch that groaned under memory, and a barn half leaning into the wind, he dismounted and offered her a hand. She ignored it, slid down on her own. Inside, she took to the corner without prompting, sat cross-legged, hands resting on her knees. She still didn't speak, didn't explore, just observed. Levi cooked beans, put a bowl in front of her. She ate with careful fingers, each movement small, efficient, like someone used to scarcity, like someone who knew meals could vanish if you made too much noise. He watched her from the table. You got a name? Nothing. You understand me? She blinked, slow and deliberate, then nodded once. That was all. He leaned back in his chair. The silence was heavier than he remembered it being before. That night, she took the floor without asking, curled up with her back to the wall and her eyes open. Levi offered the cot, but she just shook her head once. He lay awake longer than usual, listening to the wind push against the boards, to the coyotes howling beyond the ridge, and to the steady breath of a girl who didn't make a sound, even in sleep. Days passed like river stones. Quiet, solid, slow Dot she worked. Without command or instruction, she mended torn sacks, fed the chickens, hauled water. Her body moved with purpose, practiced but cautious, like she was always watching, waiting. She tended the soil with her bare hands, brushed the mule. With care, she never asked. She never expected. Once, Levi watched her standing in the barn door as the morning light broke through the dust, painting gold in her hair. She was humming, just a breath of sound. It stopped the moment she sensed him watching. Every day she wore the same thing, a rough cotton shift and a small leather pouch tied around her waist with a fraying cord. She never opened it, never let it out of her sight. He wanted to ask, but something in her silence told him that questions were intrusions, and she'd had enough of those to last a lifetime. One evening, after tending to a stubborn calf, Levi found her crouched beside the riverbed. She was building something from stones and twigs patterns that spiraled outward, strange symbols embedded in the soil. Prayers? He asked Dot. She didn't answer, just continued, placing each piece with reverence. When she finished, she stood and walked past him, not looking back. That night, he noticed the scars on her back, thin, crisscrossed, deliberate, like someone had tried to carve her into obedience. The next morning, he left the knife on the table. She looked at it, then at him. Her eyes narrowed. Not fear, not gratitude. Something sharper. He raised his hands. In case you want to leave. She didn't touch the knife, just nodded. The knife stayed on the table for 3 days before disappearing. She never used it, never mentioned it. But he noticed that when she walked outside after that, her back was straighter. In town, rumors started. Rollins gone soft, they said. Talkin' in Redskins now. Ain't he the one who lost his whole family to fever? Guess he's trying to build another one. Clay Bennett came by, sneering from the saddle. You sure she ain't poisonin' your food, Rollins? Heard them savages'll kill a man in his sleep. Levi didn't answer. He just stared until Bennett left. That night, Levi poured 2 cups of coffee and handed her one. She took it. They sat on the porch, watching stars blink into life. Crickets chirped. The world breathed. I lost a daughter, he said, voice rough, and a wife. She didn't move. Used to talk to the wind out here, pretend it answered. It didn't. For the first time, she turned her face fully to him. Her eyes weren't soft. They were bottomless. Not empty, but filled with things he'd never understand. She held up her hand, curled her fingers, and tapped her chest twice with a fist. Then pointed to him. Then touched the pouch. He didn't understand. She reached into the pouch just for a moment and pulled out a small bone. Worn smooth. A child's. She pressed it to her lips, then tucked it away again. Levi nodded, throat tight. You too. The next week, the barn creaked in the wind. She spent time inside it, more than usual. He didn't ask why until one night. When he saw the shovel, she was digging beneath the floorboards. Careful, methodical. He stepped into the doorway. She didn't stop. What are you doing? He asked. She said nothing. Then, as the dirt gave way, she uncovered a small bundle wrapped in hide. Bones, feathers, a single strand of braided black hair. She looked up at him. And this time, she didn't look through him. She saw him. And that him see her. Levi didn't speak. He just knelt beside her, watched as she pulled out the bones, cradled them, then placed them gently in a hole. She covered them in silence. When it was done, she took his hand and pressed it over the dirt. No words, no tears, but something passed between them, deep and fierce, older than grief and heavier than blood. And Levi Rollins, man of silence, of loss, of empty beds, and haunted winds felt something unfamiliar burn behind his ribs. He didn't know what it was, but he knew it had cost more than $10 dot, and it had only just begun. Levi Rollins woke before dawn. Same as always, the sound of the wind pressing against the old house like a restless spirit. He'd lived in silence for so long, it had become a kind of comfort. Predictable. But now that silence shared space with another kind, the girl, the one he'd bought for $10. The one who hadn't said a word, not even when she buried bones under his barn floor. Asterisk, he didn't know what to make of her. Only that every time she crossed a room, she brought a hush with her. Not fear, not shame, something deeper. She was a storm holding its breath. Asterisk, she was already outside when he stepped onto the porch. The sky behind her, bruised with morning light. She moved like a shadow, feeding the chickens, hauling water. A silent rhythm. Her hands were raw from labor, but she never complained, never paused. It was as though pain didn't register in her world, or maybe she'd made peace with it long ago. Asterisk. He watched her pour feed into the trough, her profile sharp against the rising sun. The same leather pouch still hung at her waist. Always that pouch, as if her soul lived inside it. Asterisk, she never went near town. Levi didn't ask why. He figured she had her reasons, same as him. Asterisk, by mid-morning, he saddled up and rode to the trading post for supplies. He didn't like going, but a man had to eat. Eyes followed him like ghosts when he stepped through the door. Some folks nodded out of habit. Others didn't bother. Clay Bennett was there. The man had a way of standing like he owned more than land, like the dust answered to him. He leaned against the counter, a grin like a knife under his mustache. Asterisk. Well, if it ain't the man with the wildflower bride, Clay said, just loud enough for the others to hear. Heard you're civilizing one of them savages. That right? Asterisk. Levi didn't reply, just nodded to the storekeep and dropped his list on the counter. Asterisk. Clay pushed off the wall and followed him outside. Tell me something, Rollins. She cook? Clean? Or just stand around looking pretty and quiet like a doll? Asterisk. Levi's back tensed. Go home, Bennett. Asterisk. Clay stepped closer, a toothpick rolling between his teeth. You best be careful. They may look soft, but they carry curses in their blood, war paint in their hearts. Asterisk. Levi's hand itched near his holster, but he walked away. Some fights were worth the bullets. Not yet. Asterisk. Back at the ranch, she greeted him without greeting, took the sack of flour from his hands, and vanished into the kitchen. No words, no glances. But later, he found a plate of warm cornbread waiting for him, butter melting slow in the center. Asterisk. It was the first time she'd made anything other than beans. That night, the wind changed. It was subtle at first, too quiet. The kind of quiet Levi had learned to trust during the war, when the woods stopped breathing before ambushes. Even the coyotes were silent. He stepped outside and scanned the ridge. Moonlight cast everything in shades of warning. Asterisk. She stood in the yard, staring at the tree line. Asterisk. What is it? He asked. She didn't answer. Instead, she knelt and began drawing in the dirt with a stick. Symbols, some spirals, others jagged like claws. When she finished, she rubbed ash from the stove into her fingers and smeared marks on the door framed. Asterisk. He watched, confused but respectful. What does it mean? Asterisk. She glanced at him just once, then held up 2 fingers, twisted them, pointed. West. Trouble coming. He loaded his rifle before bed. Asterisk. The next morning, they found the calf dead, gutted clean. A strange sigil carved into its hide, something that didn't belong to any animal Levi knew. The meat was untouched, left to rot in the sun. A message. She stood beside him, gaze steady, lips pressed tight. "Bennett, Levi." Muttered. She didn't flinch. For the next few days, she stayed close to the house, didn't tend the animals, didn't hum. Her movements sharpened, no longer graceful but coiled, like something preparing to strike. The silence between them thickened. Levi tried to speak, to break it, but every time he opened his mouth, it felt like trespass. He began to notice her eyes flickering to the horizon more often, watching, measuring distance. He started sleeping, with his shotgun closer to the bed. One evening, after supper, she sat at the table across from him for the first time, laid out a piece of coal from the fire, and on a torn feed sack, she began to draw. First, she sketched a figure on horseback, long hair streaming behind. Then a fire, a child's face, smoke curling around it. Then a man in blue, a saber, blood. Her hand trembled. She turned the sack toward him. Levi stared at the crude image, each stroke of black meaning more than words ever could. Her family, her village, burned. She pointed to the child, then to herself. He swallowed hard. "You were the only one?" A nod. Then she drew a chain around the figure's ankles. She had been captured, sold, passed around. Levi gripped the table until the wood bit into his palm. She added one more figure, a man with a beard, a wide-brimmed hat, laughter drawn, in jagged lines around his mouth. Clay. Levi stood so fast his chair scraped the floor. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. The next day, Levi rode to Bennett's border, stood on the line between their lands. The air there felt raw warmer, somehow, even though the clouds hung low. Clay didn't come out, but his men watched from the porch. Levi met their eyes, one by one, then turned and left. He wasn't ready. Not yet. When he returned home, she was gone. The house was quiet. The animals restless. His heart skipped. He checked the barn, the chicken coop, the woods behind the ridge. Nothing. Then he saw the pouch. It was gone too. She never went anywhere without it. He mounted his horse and followed the faint trail through the grass. Bent stalks, disturbed soil. She didn't know how to cover her tracks. Not like someone who meant to run. Half a mile out, he found a shredded piece of cloth snagged on a branch. Further still, the ground was scuffed, torn. Blood, not much, but enough. Then a single boot print, too large to be hers. Bennett. The sun was dropping. He kicked the horse into a gallop. By the time he reached the edge of Bennett's land, the moon was up, and the sky was breathing fire. A barn stood in the distance, light flickering through its slats. He dismounted quietly, rifle in hand. Inside, he found her, tied to a post, gagged, eyes wild but dry. Clay sat nearby, nursing a bottle and grinning. "I knew you'd come." Clay said, "You care more for her than you admit." Thought I'd test that theory. Levi raised the rifle. "Let her go." Clay stood, staggered a little. "She's not yours, Rollins. Hell, she ain't even a person, far as the laws. Concerned, she's property. $10 property. Then I'll burn every inch of land you own for stealing what's mine." Clay laughed. "You think I'm afraid of a broken rancher with a ghost for a wife and a savage for a housemaid?" Levi didn't answer. The shot rang out before. Clay could blink. It hit the bottle first, then the post near his ear. Clay dropped, not dead, but shook. Levi stepped forward and cut the ropes. She fell into his arms, tense as a coiled snake, then went still. Asterisk they didn't speak on the ride back. Her hand clutched the pouch. Her breath shook. But she was whole. Asterisk when they reached the house, she stood on the porch a long time before walking inside. That night, Levi found her in the kitchen, fingers curled around the pouch. She looked up. Then, for the first time, she whispered, "Thank you." Asterisk one word. Fragile as smoke. But it broke something in him. Asterisk, he didn't answer. He just nodded. He sat with her until the sun came up. Neither of them slept. Asterisk, and though neither said much more, something had shifted between the dirt and silence, between the war inside her and the quiet in him. Asterisk, it was no longer about what she wouldn't say. It was about what she no longer had to. The rain started as a whisper against the roof, soft and searching, like it was unsure whether it wanted to fall at all. Levi sat at the table, watching the flames in the hearth curl and shift. Atza sat across from him, sharpening a blade with slow, careful motions. Since the night he found her bound in Bennett's barn, something had settled between them, something unspoken, but real. The kind of understanding that didn't need words. She hadn't said another since her whispered, "Thank you." But her presence spoke in its own way. She moved through the house now like she belonged, like her silence was no longer armor, just part of the air. Levi didn't push. He knew some wounds didn't scab over. They just stayed there, beneath the skin, reminding you every time the wind changed. Outside, thunder grumbled over the hills. Levi stood and crossed to the door. The rain had turned heavy now, the kind that soaked through leather in minutes. In the distance, something shifted. A flicker of light too deliberate to be lightning. He stepped out onto the porch, heart tightening. Another flash. This one read, "Fire." He moved fast. By the time Atza followed him out, the barn was fully ablaze. The roof crackled and popped, flames chewing their way skyward, thick smoke churning into the storm. Levi's hands trembled as he grabbed a bucket, but it was useless. The fire had been set with intent. She didn't ask questions, just grabbed her pouch and followed him to the edge of the blaze, face still and grim. In the flicker of firelight, her scars looked like brands. He knew who'd done this, and he knew it wasn't just about land or cattle anymore. Bennett had crossed a line. The barn was gone before sunrise. The next day, Levi loaded his rifle and saddlebags. He'd had enough of threats, of warnings carved into hides, of fire in the dark. Enough of watching over his shoulder. "You can stay," he told her as he saddled the horse. "If I don't come back," she walked past him, climbed up on the horse behind him, and didn't say a word. They rode through the low hills in silence. The wind carried the scent of wet ash, and the sky was a bruised gray. It was a long ride to Bennett's land, but Levi didn't rush it. He wasn't sure what the end would look like, only that it needed to happen. By late afternoon, they reached the ridge overlooking Bennett's ranch. Levi crouched, watching from behind a rock outcrop. 3 men stood on the porch, rifles slung lazy but ready. Bennett wasn't in sight. Levi studied the layout. He'd fought in war. He knew what a fortified position looked like. This was no ranch anymore. This was a trap waiting to be sprung. Atza tapped his shoulder. She held up 2 fingers and pointed east. Another patrol. She'd seen them before he had. He nodded. They had no chance head on. But this wasn't about war. This was about ending it. They waited until dusk. The patrol circled back. 2 of the men went inside. One stayed on the porch, rocking back and forth like he had nothing to fear. Levi and Atza moved like ghosts, flanking the outer fence. Reached the barn first. Empty. Quiet. She moved ahead of him, eyes scanning, fingers resting on the pouch like it gave her strength. In the far corner, they found a stack of crates, gunpowder, and ammunition. Levi smiled for the first time in days. He rigged a fuse with care. Atza crouched beside him, holding the lamp steady. "You ever shot a rifle?" he asked. She shook her head. "Don't worry, you won't have to." They moved quickly. As the fuse burned, they circled around the house, keeping low. The explosion came fast and brutal, a thunderclap that shattered the night. The porch guard dove off the steps, shouting. 2 others rushed out, confused and blinded by smoke. Levi took the shot. 1 man dropped. Another spun, screaming. The 3rd ran. Atza didn't flinch. Then Bennett appeared. He stepped out with a shotgun in hand, smoke curling behind him. His eyes found Levi in an instant, hate blooming on his face like wildfire. "You think this ends with you, Rollins?" he shouted. "You think you can save that thing you brought home?" Atza stepped out beside Levi, eyes locked on Bennett. "You ain't worth saving," Levi said, voice low. Bennett raised the shotgun. Levi fired. The shot hit Bennett in the shoulder, spinning him into the doorway. He dropped the weapon, stumbled, but didn't fall. Inside the house, someone shouted. Levi didn't wait. He charged forward, kicked in the door, and found Bennett crawling toward a pistol. He stepped on his hand. "It's over." Bennett looked up, bleeding, smiling. "You ain't better than me. You bought her same as I would have." Levi pressed the barrel against Bennett's forehead. "No, I bought her to save myself. You would have bought her to break her." Atza entered the room behind him. She knelt beside Bennett and pulled something from her pouch. A carved bone, sharpened to a point. She didn't speak, didn't hesitate. She drove it into his throat, gasped, choked, and died staring up at a girl who refused to be silent anymore. Levi didn't stop her. When it was done, she stood, breath heavy, blood on her hands, no guilt in her eyes, only release. They set fire to the rest of the house before they left. No one followed them. Back at the ranch, the wind was gentler. Smoke still lingered in the air, but it didn't feel like a warning anymore. It felt like cleansing. Levi collapsed on the porch, exhausted. His side throbbed. He'd taken a graze during the fight. Nothing serious, but enough to remind him of how close he'd come. Atza cleaned the wound without ceremony. She ground herbs between stones, mixed them with water, and pressed the paste into the gash. He winced, but didn't complain. "You didn't have to come with me," he murmured. She didn't reply, but after she bandaged him, she sat beside him, pulled out the pouch and emptied it between them. A tooth, a feather, a small faded strip of cloth. "This was your brother's," he guessed. She nodded. He reached out, touched the items gently. "You gave up your chance at running, at starting over. Why?" She looked at him then, eyes full of things too big for language. And then she whispered, "Because you never looked away." It hit harder than a bullet, the truth in it, the simplicity, the weight. Levi didn't know what he was anymore. A rancher, a broken man, a killer. But he knew that whatever this girl was, whatever she had survived, she had something in her he would never fully understand, and he would never stop protecting it. That night, the fire burned low, and they shared a blanket near the hearth. Didn't speak again. She didn't need to. But before he drifted off to sleep, she touched his hand and whispered one more word. Home. It wasn't much, but it was everything. The wind came down from the northern hills like a whisper of winter, though the calendar said summer still had some fight left in it. It bent the grass low, ruffled the horses' manes, and carried with it a scent Levi hadn't smelled in a long time. Gun oil, sweat, and ash. Not the remnants of a fire, but the promise of one. He sat on the porch with Atza, both watching the land stretch out in silence. The sun was dipping low, dragging its long orange fingers across the sky. She had a strip of deer hide stretched across her lap, carving something into it with a sharpened flint. The blade moved with precision, rhythm, like her hands remembered how to make peace, even when her heart still stood on edge. Asterisk, there hadn't been trouble for weeks. After Bennett's death and the blaze that leveled his ranch, the town kept quiet. Folks stopped looking at Levi with suspicion and started nodding with something close to respect or fear. Either worked. But quiet never lasted in the West. Not when blood had been spilled and power changed hands. Asterisk, he saw the dust cloud first. A faint blur on the horizon, where the land met the sky. Atsa saw it too. She didn't speak, just rose slowly, knife still. In her hand, 3 riders. Levi stood, feeling the ache in his side where the bullet had grazed him weeks back. The wound had healed, but the memory clung like a second skin. He reached for the rifle leaning against the wall. Atsa turned toward the corral, her steps purposeful. She didn't ask what they should do. She didn't need to. She knew as well as he did trouble didn't announce itself unless it planned to stay. Asterisk, the riders stopped at the gate. Dust clung to their coats, their horses slick with sweat. One man wore a military jacket, torn at the cuffs, the brass buttons dulled by time. Another had a star pinned to his vest, the kind that once meant law, but now meant only muscle for hire. The third had a scar that split his lip like a crack in dry earth. Asterisk Levi stepped forward, rifle cradled but not raised. You're alone, way from where you belong. Asterisk, the man with the star spat. We're here for the girl. Atsa stepped beside Levi, calm as still water. She's Apache, the man continued. She was reported missing by a cavalry officer out of Fort Merrill. Turns out she was sold illegally. By law, she's to be returned to military custody. Asterisk Levi didn't blink. You mean turned over to the men who slaughtered her village and sold her like cattle? Asterisk, the man with the star, narrowed his eyes. Doesn't matter what happened before. She's government property. Asterisk, she's not property, Levi said. Not anymore. The third man reached for his holster. Atsa moved before Levi could. Breathe. Asterisk, she pulled a bow from behind the porch, strung with sinew. The wood carved from an ash tree, felled last winter. The arrow flew clean and fast, thudding into the ground between the horses. The animals reared. One man cursed, nearly falling from his saddle. Asterisk, she's warning you, Levi said, voice flat. You don't want to see what happens when she stops warning. Asterisk, the man with the military coat sneered. You think you can hold off the law with sticks and spit? Asterisk, she's more fire than girl, Levi said. And I'll burn with her before I let you take her. Asterisk, there was a beat of silence. The kind where the whole world holds its breath to see which way the story will turn. Then the man with the star gave a small nod. Guns were drawn. Asterisk Atsa fired first. The arrow caught the lawman in the shoulder, spinning him off the horse. Levi's rifle cracked an instant later, shattering the skull of the man with the scar. The third man dismounted, firing as he ducked behind the water trough. Bullets sang through the air, splintering the porch railing. Asterisk Levi ducked low, heart thundering. Atsa was already moving around the side of the house, silent and quick as a hawk's shadow. She disappeared behind the shed, then reappeared 10 seconds later with a burning torch. Asterisk, what are you? Levi started, then stopped. Asterisk, she dipped the torch into a small barrel of oil near the barn, grabbed 2 bundles wrapped in hide from the ground, and hurled them toward the front gate. They hit with a burst of flame and smoke homemade fire bombs, stitched with bone and resin. The man behind the trough screamed as fire licked at his legs. Asterisk Levi stood and fired 1 clean shot. The man stopped screaming. Silence fell. The only sound was the crackle of burning grass and the soft creak of wind through the beams. Asterisk Atsa stood in the smoke, her face illuminated by firelight. Her hair danced in the heat. Her eyes, those sharp, steady eyes, looked toward the horizon, not the bodies. She wasn't waiting for applause. She was waiting for the next fight. Asterisk Levi dropped the rifle and walked to her. He touched her shoulder, and she looked up at him, still breathing hard. Asterisk, you didn't hesitate, he said. Asterisk, she looked at the bodies and back at him. They would have burned it all. Asterisk, he nodded. But you burned first. For the first time, she smiled. That night, they buried the men out past the ridge, under a rock that wouldn't mark them by name. Levi didn't believe in prayers for the wicked. He didn't think she did either. Asterisk afterward, they sat by the fire inside the house. Levi poured 2 cups of coffee and handed her one. Her fingers brushed his. A quiet passed between them, not of silence, but understanding. Asterisk, you don't have to stay, he said, watching the flames. You could go north, disappear, start fresh. She shook her head. I don't want to disappear anymore. Asterisk, he looked at her, heart thudding slow and steady. Then what do you want? Asterisk, she didn't answer right away. Instead, she untied the pouch from her waist and opened it for the first time without secrecy. Inside were only 3 things now: the tooth, the feather, and a single blackened match. Asterisk, I used to believe everything I loved would burn, she whispered. That fire followed me, that I was cursed. He listened, not moving. But now I know, she continued, voice barely more than breath. Sometimes fire is how you survive. Asterisk Levi nodded once. You didn't survive. You changed the story. Asterisk, she met his eyes. So did you. Asterisk, they sat in silence after that, letting the fire speak for them. When the wind changed, it didn't carry the scent of ash or gunpowder. It smelled like sage, like rain before it falls, like something trying to grow. Asterisk, he didn't touch her, didn't try to define what they were or what they would become. Asterisk, but in the hush of that house, surrounded by ghosts and scar tissue, and a girl who once never spoke, Levi Rollins felt something inside him finally come unstuck. Asterisk later, she stood and walked out to the yard alone. The stars were scattered across the sky, and she tilted her head back to look at them, as if naming them in her mind. She began to sing. It wasn't a song he understood. The language was older than the fences on his land, older than bullets and ranches and the kind of cruelty that put people in chains. It was a song from before, from blood and bone and the wind that remembered. He stood in the doorway, listening, and for the first time in a long while, he cried. Asterisk, not from grief, not from guilt, but because the silence was finally gone. She was still a girl of fire. Asterisk, but now she had a voice. Asterisk, and it echoed across the land, soft but unshakable, as if the earth itself had been waiting for her to speak. Asterisk, if this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. Because sometimes the ones who burn brightest are the ones who are forced to stay silent the longest. Asterisk.